So I'd like to present a video about a watchmaker about whom very little concrete information is available. However, we are able to take educated guesses behind the identity of this individual. And now this is an individual whose watches, and of course it cannot be excluded that this represents several individuals signing under the same name, as this is the most common name, but we're discussing watches signed H Montandon Locle. And it should be noted that prior to 1850, we have multiple individuals with very high visibility in Devoin almanacs, and these were primarily two Henrys that were fabricating out of La Chaux-de-Fonds, and one was Jean-Jacques Henri, and he is Montandon Guizy in the Devoin almanacs. And later, of course, his son would continue under Henri Montandon. He was allied Nardin, relative. He married a relative of Ulysse Nardin. However, and the other, this pre-1850 watchmaker was Henri Montandon, who owned La Belle Maison, and he was also a judge, but also in business and a watchmaker, selling watches. And another interesting character, I can provide a picture of him. But and then we also have another Henri Montandon who was a pendoulier or pendulum clock maker in Replat. And this Henri Montandon was purchasing wooden cabinets for his pendulum clocks from the Dubois of Locle. So, but he also may have done pocket watches. However, after we get to the 1850s, we pass beyond the mid 1850s, we are dealing with, we are starting to get other Henrys on the scene. And most of the pocket watches that we are discussing here will fall between the 1860 to 1880 period, roughly. And now there was a Henri Louis Montandon who was in La Chaux-de-Fonds for some time, then spent approximately a year in Geneva fabricating for, I believe it was Constantine Vacheron. He is an interesting individual. Now, he really relocated to Besançon in France in 1850 and started the first 10 years of his watch fabrication there was with a company called Montandon & Co. And he had two other Swiss partners. Now, he should be kept in mind as we continue the other Henrys. I will return to him. Now, the other Henrys that we're dealing with in this 1860 to 1880 period, and I will provide a list of these possible candidates, but we do have the son of Jean-Jacques Henri Montandon Guizy. This is Henri Montandon Nardin, and in Dublin we have very few address listings for him. We do find him at Clé Vaillant, number 123. He does appear to have later moved to Neuchâtel City, so he appears to have dropped out of the Dublin almanacs earlier than expected, so that it's not exactly clear to what level he was producing. He could be a contender for this title of H Montandon Locle, but this is we're under the we need to make assumptions in it, or base our theories on indirect evidence, basically indirect evidence case studies, as we are doing in this case. Yet, and then we have after the 1890s start to begin, we by the, let's say, mid to late 1890s, we're already dealing with totally different individuals. Then these individuals are much more related to other watches, complicated watches, and we're probably not signing H Montandon Locle. So we do have these different periods, and I will provide the breakdowns. Yet this 1860 to 1880 period is what interests us. And we do have a plethora of choices here, and that makes this designation very difficult. This is a mysterious watch fabricator at any rate, but in the stride of approaching this question, I did look at our entire body of evidence. We do have a lot of watches to look at, and in the catalog, he is the largest single watch manufacturer amongst Montandon watches. That this watch frequency would be considered common, and although all Montandon watches are rare, but he is the most common. And this indicates a very large production. So this is exactly one clue that we have to concern ourselves with. But another interesting clue is we will notice these 7 objects here, of which we find many, these are simply the movements are left over. In this case, we have a movement, a crystal, and a dust cover. We have another movement with the dials, of course, and signed. And we have a dial alone. And there's an interesting reason for this. And as I begin to think that we see a lot of these H Montandon Locle movements and dials, but without the cases. And generally this is an issue that is appearing when we have a precious metal involved, in particular gold, because when times are scarce, gold is sold and the movement remains, and the gold is melted down, cannibalized. So this led me to revisit the catalog listings, and to my surprise, and I'd never come to this realization before, all of these watches are gold. They're all gold. I cannot find H Montandon Locle silver watches. Now there are Henri Montandon Besançon in silver. There are later Henri Montandon Geneva watches in silver, in particular a Masonic watch which was made for Aleister Crowley, this individual of ill repute from England. This is interesting. This tells us much. The fact that these watches are only gold. Indeed, the only watches that I possess, these 2 are gold watches. Now, this is key set, key wind, and this is a stem winding variant. This is also a stem winding variant, which is we only have the movement. Once again, this would have been in gold, but these 2 are both in 14 karat gold. It's probable that these were 18 karat gold. They may have been 14, but I believe these were probably 18 karat gold. These are later watches. These are later pieces. Now, of these items, we have serial numbers in the 46,000 range. This is 42,638, 46,725, 46,921, and until we get to this piece, which is 55,811. And I will also provide a chart with all of the serial numbers, the movement types, the dating, and the dial and movement diameters. Now, these pieces easily fit into this roughly 1860 to 1880 period, and you generally tend to be around the 1870 mark. Now, these pieces were moving mid-1870s most likely, but these pieces are clearly later. And in fact, when we look at the serial numbers for these later pieces now this piece is an exception. This piece is number 73,194. This is around 1870. It's a 45 millimeter movement. This piece. Now, this piece has what appears to be a golden seconds hand, which is also interesting and probably matched with the golden case. But these later watches, they tend to be very fine, and indeed this piece has, now these are all Lepine caliber 5 movements, but when we get into these later pieces, and these are clearly pieces that are around the end of the 1880s, and in this piece in particular, we do have what we're fortunate to have on the back of this piece, and this is a movement that we find in the FHF Fontaine-Mellon style, but there is a stamp here which appears to be a feather, and upon consulting the Poinçons, we find that this stamp belonged to a company which was called Blum et Grosjean, and this individuals, this Blum and Grosjean, or Grosjean as we would say, they were fabricating around 1889 to 1893. And after this period, the partnership seems to have split up, but we know that this Poinçon is theirs, and we can fit this into their period. Now, that's quite fascinating. And one of the assumptions that I had made was that either we're dealing with multiple makers, or we're dealing with a very long line in a family, for example, father and a son. Now, in the case that this would be Henri Louis in Besançon, France, signing a Locle, this would not have been out of place because of the legal situation in France with Poinçons and precious metals. Now, there was a heavy duty for gold and silver, precious metals objects in France that required state permission, and this levy caused, it was basically not feasible if one wanted to make very tight margins. And indeed, of all of the H Montandon Locle pieces I have seen, the cases are never stamped with quality, either Swiss or French stamps of any kind. And this is an indication that these may have been made for export market, where there would not have been such stringent requirements in place. One interesting factor about Henri Louis that we specifically know from French almanacs between 1860s and 1880s is the fact that he was a watch exporter. And when we come to the, go back to the catalog, where we have found out this revelation that all of these watches are only gold, this almost wants to suggest the possibility that this was indeed a product line, that these were only gold watches, and that these were going for export for foreign markets, in particular the US market. And this is where these tend to materialize, is very frequently these are in America. So this would be a series of factors that points to Henri Louis being the watch fabricator behind this. And indeed, if this is the case, I probably would have started out that these Lepine movements were being made in France, but eventually they were also made in Switzerland with the cases. And the fact that there's no stamps means that these were going for, there was no need to stamp them, but this would probably definitely pointing to Swiss fabrication, which what we would expect, but that these were going to the US market. And if this were the case, then when we get to this period here, where the watches begin to get a little bit more ornate, and the movements, these are totally different movements. This was the younger Henri Montandon. This was Henri Edouard, the son of Henri Louis, who by 1893 was already establishing his sales point in Paris, and his fabrication point in Besançon was still running. However, it is very possible that this represents a fabrication line of products, because one does not imagine that a watchmaker could only do gold watches. And this would have been a very narrow product, a niche market. It is possible, yet we do not see any Henri Montandons noted for gold watch fabrication in Develing. So this almost seems to be, it is highly likely that this represents a niche market that was exported to the United States at very low margins, and something along these lines. Now, this could be, it could be that this was actually done by a Swiss watchmaker. There are many examples, and I will provide these watchmakers at the end of the video when I show the watch catalog information, and I will give a list of these relevant makers. It should also be noted that in Davoine, we do find Henri Montandons that were specifically making anchor escapements, and they were basically movement fabricators. There is one in particular that was at Cachot, and this is in Lassagne. However, it is less likely that he could be our individual, because these watches always tend to come with signed dust covers, and one does not expect that somebody who specializes only in the construction of anchor escapements, or indeed even silver and anchor escapements, if that would be the case, would be also doing dust covers. But he also was a watch tool seller. So these are various different files and various different tools for making watches. So this candidate seems less likely. However, we would find him in business in this later 1880s, 1890s period, where we see items like this appearing. Yet the fact that these both have the same signing, and of course we see this also, this H Montandon Locle, that this does not seem to be equatable to him as well. So we do have this mystery. However, the fact that we do find that this mysterious watchmaker was only fabricating gold watches is in my mind, a very strong anchor towards a single maker who was making a very niche product. So I just wanted to present these 7 objects, and I would like to now go to the catalog and discuss the catalog findings with you. So now we have the catalog of Montandon watchmakers, which I have compiled, and I would like to point out that there was a Henri Montandon of Le Pont-de-Martel that was recognized for 3 gold watches, which he presented in 1857 at the, I believe this was at the Bern expedition in Bern, Switzerland, and these were between 10 and 18 linea. These were anchor and cylinder pieces. Now, signature and place of his signing are unclear. However, we do know the serial numbers, and they're quite low. These are 805, 806, and 807. And now, it is very possible that this Henri Montandon was one of our individuals, as he was in this period. He is a very strong candidate for watches. However, unfortunately, the only serial numbers that we have associated with him are extremely low. Now, it should be mentioned that he was a watchmaker of montre compliquée, and so this is complicated timepieces, multiple complications, and all of his sons were also fabricating the same. So now, whereas he is a candidate, we do have this very poor sample of only 3 serial numbers, and they're very low, and they're from the late 1850s. Now, he lived from 1822 to 1872. He would be a possible candidate for these watches that we would find in the 1860s and 1870s. However, after his death, it would have been incumbent upon the children to continue this business, and he did have many sons that were all in the watch business. Now, this cannot be excluded. This is a rather strong contender. However, all of the children were involved with montres compliquées, and therefore there is a suggestion that they were working with higher quality, higher grade movements and watch types rather than these Lepine 5, although it cannot be totally excluded. Now, the other watches that we have with Henri Montandon, we have Henri Montandon that moved to Besançon, and this is Henri Louis. And now we see that he has various different pieces: bronze or brass, gold, silver, and we have a lot of serial numbers in the 20s and 30,000s. Now later, we do find much higher serialization, including in the 76 to 90,000, 91,000. And this is clearly Henri Louis and his son Henri Edward. And there we also have other watches. This is Cercle H Montandon Besançon. They were participating in various different observatory trials in Besançon. It's not exactly clear, is this Henri Montandon, the son, Henri Edward, that is, or is this a Charles Montandon that was with this Cercle? This partnership is very poorly understood, very poorly comprehended. However, this is also a possible tie-in with Henri Edward. So when we begin to look at and I will switch, we have a huge amount. And there is another Henri. This was Henri of La Chaux-de-Fonds, and his full name was Charles Henry. And once again, we have a totally different serial numberization. There are only 3 documented pieces, and they have much smaller serial numbers. This is a combination of gold and silver pieces, and they were all key-wind, and this is certainly in this 1860 to 1870 period. But now that we begin to analyze only Henri Montandon Locle signed pieces, we find these beginning from 27,577. And we have pieces, once again, every single one, except with the exception of one, which is a multi-metallic or bimetallic piece that was made in silver and 22 karat gold, signed H Montandon Locle, and this was this 1860-1880 period. However, this is not a watch. This is a clock, and this is a Chinese dragon clock of silver and 22 karat gold. Therefore, it is explained this presence of gold. However, the piece was a watch movement, essentially, in this clock. Yet, regarding pocket watches, when we look at this, and the serialization we see this dating 1860 to 1870 period. Some of them may be the late 1850s, however, all gold, 14 karat, 18 karat. We see this carrying in through the 60,000 serialization period. But this is, and then we see 70,000, 80,000, 90,000. This is a really large production. This is a lot of watches being sold, and they're all signed H Montandon Locle, and they also fit in this period. But once we get past 100,000, well, we're probably dealing with, this is probably later than 1870, and indeed it's probably closer to 1880, and this 1880 to 1890 period. These pieces, the largest serial number that we have is this very small ladies watch movement. This was this 30 millimeter diameter piece, which has the Bloom and Grosjean stamp in it. And this partnership, we know that this partnership was pretty much finished by 1893. After 1894, we certainly are not seeing, Grosjean seems to be only in business himself, and by 1895 he is, after this point we do not even see him anymore. He seems to have had some sort of financial or other difficulties, according to articles in the Swiss press, and he seems to have totally absconded from the watch business. So, and if this were a later stage of this father and son pair from Besançon, then clearly these larger pieces, over 100,000s, would already be most certainly Henri Edward, his fabrication. But if we try to move this to the Swiss Montandons, then it becomes really mysterious, because there are no real clear contenders. Now, there are pieces signed Henri Montandon Locle and Henri Montandon Geneva and H Montandon Geneva. And these are, there are not many of these pieces. These are higher grade pieces. We're talking about pieces that are repertoires, are repeater watches, quarter repeaters, this type of thing, minute repeaters. One is this Ouroboros. This it has a watch with an observatory certificate that appears to have been in the possession of Aleister Crowley, that I mentioned before, and this is signed Henri Montandon, Geneva. This was a silver watch, and it was key wind watch, and it's somewhere around this 1870 to 1890 period. I tend to think that it was a little bit towards the end of the 1880s. However, not exactly clear. These are probably watches fabricated for specialist customers, special occasions, or trials, watch trials, etc. And the serial number ranges on these are all over the board. So we do have the suggestion that these are pieces fabricated by multiple different Henrys, whereas the H Montandon Locle series is clearly, there definitely seems to be either a larger institution behind this, either a family, father and son, doing this long period of watch fabrication, or something of this variety. But once again, we have this solid gold factor in this line of watch fabrications, and these watches are numerous. And if we look at only H Montandon Locle, in my list we have objects starting from numbers 212 and terminating in almost 260, that we're talking about nearly 50 pieces. This is a significant, this is over 10% of my entire compilation of Montandon watches. So this is an incredible amount. And this suggests, once again, the fact that we have Henri Louis, who is fabricating. We see that he is mentioning exports in French almanacs for over 20 years, that this may have been a project of his dedicated towards the American market. So once again, we are obliged to make some sort of guesstimations or assumptions in this case, but this is more or less what the indirect evidence in this case study is pointing to. But this cannot be included that these were watches by another maker. It's one of the things that we find that is very intriguing about this maker. There's this very deep added element of mystery. Now, H Montandon, or Henri of Besançon, Henri Louis, he was an inventor with many patents under his belt. We see that he had upwards of 8 patents, and various different perfections, including a railroad watch, chemin de fer, and one for multiple time zones, one with basically an inner, the dial had an inner numbering as well as the outer numbering to make it easier to read. So he has a lot of patents under his belt, and he was very successful. We do find him making watches. We find advertisements that he was making watches for the judiciary in France and for the railroads. So this is very fascinating. And he was also also had some connection with the very famous Leroy dynasty in France, who were the makers for the French kings. And the Leroys had some sort of a monopoly on watches for the French Navy, and it's very possible that some of those watches tied in with Henri Montandon. This is not exactly clear. However, there are many years of mention where he is collaborating with these Leroy, and that's also interesting because the Montandon Paris and Locle did have a relationship with these earlier Leroy's in Paris at Palais Royal number 13 was the address, and we find this in the very first in the individuals who are establishing Montandon Locle that had come from Paris, and this was David Henry in particular. But he has been presenting watches to Leroy, and Leroy was purchasing them or holding certain watches and sending them to his clients in Bordeaux. But this is just a little bit of this mysterious figure that I wanted to present these 7 objects in my possession, and to discuss a little bit what the commonalities, and to put this information forward, because once again, this is a watchmaker who very little is known about this individual. However, his watches do have a popularity in auctions. They tend to fetch rather handsome fees, and the fact that we see many of these movements just appearing, only movements, a great quantity of these movements signed H Montandon Locle, which is another suggestion that, hey, these are watches which the gold has already departed the scene. It has been sold at some sort of a Lombard or basically hawked at a pawn shop, and the movement is the only thing that remains of these. But this is a very fascinating story. I wanted to share this research, and I hope to receive your comments, questions, feedback, and others, as this is something I think that is probably has the most appeal, as this is something that's not understood, and people that collect these objects want to know more about who is fabricating this and what the backstory is behind these objects. So this is just a bit of a note for the record on my research, and I thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.